Sometimes, life hands you a blow you never saw coming. You think you know where you stand, and then, without warning, the ground shifts. I've been holding on to this for a while now, but I feel like I need to get it out somehow, even if it's just telling strangers online. My wife, Rachel, and I have been together for over a decade. We met in college, went through all those tough years of growing up, building careers, figuring out life. By now, I thought I knew everything about her, and for all those years, I believed we were solid. I thought we were happy. But just recently, Rachel hit me with a request so out of left field. It felt like a punch to the gut. One night, she sat me down, looking unusually tense. I could see she had something big on her mind. At first, I assumed it was about work or maybe some decision about the house. Little things that sometimes got under her skin. But after a long silence, she finally looked me in the eyes and said, "I want to experience something new." I didn't understand at first. My mind went to all kinds of simple ideas: a trip, a new hobby, a project we could take on together. I tried to smile, encouraging her to share. But she looked at me dead serious and told me she wanted something more intimate, something with another man. I felt like the ground opened up beneath me. She had always been so committed to us, or so I thought. I just sat there, staring, while she kept talking, explaining it like she'd rehearsed the words in her mind. She told me it wasn't about any dissatisfaction with me. She said she loved me, still wanted our life together, but she had this urge she couldn't ignore. And the worst part? She had a specific person in mind, my close friend Mark. Now, Mark and I go way back. He's part of the group we hang out with on weekends, someone I've trusted with more than a few secrets over the years. I'd never imagined Rachel would look at him like that. Sure, he's always been charming, and I know he has this playful side, but it was never something I worried about. I thought Rachel and I were past that kind of insecurity, but here she was, telling me she wanted to explore, and all I could feel was the world around me crumbling. I remember asking her if I had done something wrong, something to make her doubt us. She just shook her head, insisting it wasn't about me, but something she felt she needed for herself. She even tried to make it sound simple, just once, she promised. A quick experience that would change nothing between us, as if that would make it better. I tried to breathe, to take in her words, but it felt like trying to swallow broken glass. All I could do was say no, firmly, like that would end it, but it didn't. A few days later, I found out from a friend of ours, Ben, that Rachel had gone through with it. She'd been with Mark, and she knew exactly how I felt about it, how much it would hurt me. I don't think I'd ever felt more humiliated or betrayed in my life. And yet, I didn't confront her right away. Something inside me just shifted. If Rachel wanted new experiences, I decided, then I'd give her an experience she wouldn't forget. Not in the way she expected, though. No, I'd make sure this was something she'd remember for a long time, and not in a good way. So I started to plot. A way to make her regret every bit of that decision. A way to turn her world upside down the same way she turned mine. I wanted her to question everything about Mark, about that so-called experience, even about her place among our friends. I was going to make sure she understood what betrayal felt like, what it meant to shatter someone's trust. It was the start of a plan that would take patience, but I felt something new and sharp inside me that I'd never felt before. It was like a quiet, simmering resolve, something that steadied my mind in the middle of the chaos she'd unleashed. I was hurt and angry, yes, but more than that, I was determined. After finding out that Rachel had gone through with her experience, something inside me shut down. I knew confronting her wouldn't accomplish much. She'd made her choice, fully aware of how I felt. If she was determined to experience life without boundaries, then I'd give her a taste of what that really felt like. I decided to play it cool, act as if nothing was wrong. I put on the mask of a loving, clueless husband, going about life as usual. Rachel seemed relieved by this, probably thinking I was none the wiser, that her secret was safe. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of my plan. I started with subtle moves, small, calculated gestures that would make her question herself. I'd mention Mark casually in conversation, almost as if he were a great friend I appreciated having around. "It's nice having Mark around, don't you think?" I'd say with a smile. I watched her carefully each time I mentioned his name, catching the tiny flicker of guilt that crossed her face. She tried to hide it, but I knew exactly what was going on in her mind. Then, I began to pull back in subtle ways. I'd go out more often, sometimes to the gym, sometimes with friends she didn't know well, and I'd come back late, just busy enough to keep her guessing. I never did anything outright suspicious, just enough to give her a taste of the same uncertainty and discomfort she'd forced on me. Her curiosity started to show in small ways. She'd ask me if everything was okay, and I'd smile and tell her I was fine, giving her no real answers. The more I brushed her off, the more anxious she became. It was a small satisfaction, but it felt good to see her nerves starting to fray, her confidence beginning to chip away. Then I started bringing someone else into the picture, an old friend of Rachel's named Sarah. Now, Sarah and Rachel went way back, but she'd always felt a bit insecure about her. Sarah was confident, beautiful, and had this natural charisma that seemed to draw people in. She never crossed any lines with me or Rachel, but I knew how Rachel felt about her. I'd mentioned Sarah in passing, letting little details about our interactions slip out. Nothing obvious, just enough to plant a seed of doubt. Sarah and I had a great conversation the other day. I'd say, it's nice to have someone to talk to. I watched Rachel's reaction, the way her eyes would narrow ever so slightly. She'd force a smile, but I could sense the tension building beneath it. Each time she heard Sarah's name, I knew her mind was spinning, wondering if there was something between us. As time went on, I noticed a shift in Rachel's behavior. She started clinging to me a bit more, making an effort to be attentive in ways she hadn't in years. It was almost as if she was trying to win me back, even though she had no idea I was aware of her betrayal. Every time I saw that flicker of uncertainty, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction building inside me. To keep things rolling, I maintained a friendly relationship with Mark, acting as if nothing had changed between us. We'd hang out in group settings, laugh at the same old jokes, and keep up appearances. I could tell he felt uncomfortable around me. There were these moments when he'd glance away or laugh a little too hard at something I said, but my friendly demeanor kept him off guard. I wanted him to be part of this lesson, too, and he had no idea he was falling into my plan. Rachel, though, was handling it worse. I could see her growing distance from Mark, which was exactly what I wanted. She was starting to question everything, probably wondering if she'd risked her marriage for a passing thrill. I could sense the regret beginning to sink in, and I knew that soon enough, she'd be on the verge of breaking. It was working better than I'd imagined. Rachel was unraveling, her confidence slipping with every little hint I dropped, every offhand comment about Sarah, every late night out. She had started this, and now I was determined to let her feel the weight of her own choices, one small piece at a time. And through it all, I kept my face calm, neutral, showing her none of the storm brewing inside me. If she was confused, hurt, or unsure, that was her burden to carry, just like she'd forced me to carry mine. The woman who'd once been so sure of herself, so convinced that our love was unshakable, was now looking at me with a mixture of uncertainty and fear. And that was exactly where I wanted her. As the days went by, I kept up the charade. I could see Rachel growing more restless with each passing day, her worry etched in the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. I knew my plan was working, but I had to be careful, subtle. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her actions, not give her any reason to accuse me of playing games. I started making small adjustments to my routine, just enough to keep her on edge. I'd leave my phone face down on the counter or excuse myself to take a call in another room. Once, when she walked in, I lowered my voice just a bit, as if I were talking about something private. It was enough to make her suspicious without crossing any real lines. One evening, I accidentally left my phone unlocked with a message from Sarah open on the screen. There was nothing overtly flirty, but it was friendly enough to make Rachel's imagination spin. I noticed her glance at the screen before she quickly looked away, her face tight with worry. Then came the nights when I'd mentioned going out with friends, including Sarah. I'd casually drop it in conversation, letting her fill in the blanks with her own insecurities. Just grabbing drinks with Sarah and a few others, I'd say, making it sound casual and harmless. She'd smile, forcing herself to act supportive, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the way her eyes dimmed just a little. Rachel never confronted me directly, but I could tell she was struggling. She didn't want to admit she felt threatened by another woman, not after what she'd done. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here she was, the same woman who once felt bold enough to ask me for freedom, now feeling the same jealousy and insecurity she'd pushed onto me. I hadn't even crossed any lines with Sarah. It was all in Rachel's head, and I was just nudging her insecurities along. Meanwhile, I kept things steady with Mark. We continued to hang out with the group, and I made sure to laugh at his jokes, slap him on the back, act as though everything was just fine. He seemed more uncomfortable as time went on, though. Occasionally, I'd catch a flicker of guilt in his eyes, a hesitation in his laughter, but my easygoing demeanor kept him off guard. He was part of this lesson too, and he had no idea the role he was playing. Rachel's behavior began to shift more noticeably. She started pulling away from Mark in group settings, becoming quieter when he was around. I could see her starting to question her choices, probably wondering if she'd risked everything for nothing. It was clear that her mind was swirling with regret, that she was beginning to feel the consequences of her actions. Her unease didn't just stop with Mark, though. I noticed her trying to be closer to me, as if she were trying to reclaim some connection she'd thrown away. She'd linger around me, initiate small touches, a hand on my shoulder, a light brush of her fingers. Every attempt at closeness only reminded me of the distance she'd created, and it felt like a twisted victory each time. I stayed distant, keeping my responses light and casual. If she asked me about my day, I'd give her vague answers, just enough to keep her guessing. Her attempts to get me to open up felt forced, almost desperate, and each time she tried, I pulled back, letting her see just how much had changed between us. One night, I decided to up the ante a bit. I invited Sarah over under the pretense of needing help with some minor project around the house. I made sure Rachel wouldn't know about it until she walked in and saw Sarah sitting on the couch, laughing at something I'd said. The look on Rachel's face was priceless, a mix of surprise and discomfort that she tried to hide behind a tight smile. "Oh, hey, Rachel," I greeted her casually, as if it were nothing unusual. Sarah just stopped by to help with a few things. Rachel forced a smile, her voice a little too bright. "That's nice. Good to see you, Sarah." We spent the evening chatting, but I could feel Rachel's eyes on us the entire time, watching every gesture, every smile. I leaned in a bit closer to Sarah, laughed a little louder, just enough to let Rachel's insecurities grow. Eventually, after Sarah left, Rachel couldn't hold back anymore. She looked at me, her expression a mix of fear and frustration. "Is there something going on between you and Sarah?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I kept my face calm, feigning surprise. "What? No, Rachel. She's just a friend." I let a pause hang in the air before adding, "But it's nice to have someone to talk to, someone who understands." Rachel's face fell, her forced smile fading. She looked down, struggling to mask the jealousy and guilt in her expression. Inside, I felt a twisted satisfaction watching her go through this. She was starting to understand the weight of betrayal, and that was exactly what I wanted. Over the next few days, she became even more attentive to me, as if she were trying to make up for something. She texted me throughout the day, asked me random questions, sent me photos of things she thought I'd find funny. I kept my replies polite but short, never giving her the full engagement she was looking for. Then, I decided to push things a step further. I mentioned casually that I was going out with Sarah and a few friends for drinks. Rachel tried to hide her reaction, nodding and forcing a smile. "Have fun," she said, but her voice sounded tight. When I returned later that night, she was waiting for me, trying to act casual but clearly tense. She'd made a nice dinner, laid out a cozy setup in the living room. I could tell she was trying to win me back, as if a nice evening together would somehow undo everything that had happened. But I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. As we sat down to eat, she kept fishing for details, asking things like, "Did you have a good time with Sarah? And what did you guys talk about?" Her voice was light, but I could see the fear behind her eyes. "Oh, it was nice," I replied casually. "Sarah's easy to talk to, you know." I watched as Rachel's face fell just a bit, her smile growing more strained. She nodded, and I could tell my words had struck the right nerve. That night, she clung to me even more, her usual confidence slipping as she tried to hold on to something she felt slipping away. But I kept myself distant, letting her feel the full effect of her actions, letting her insecurities continue to simmer. Rachel had wanted new experiences, and now she was getting them, just not in the way she'd expected. And as her world started to crumble, I knew I was finally getting the justice I'd been waiting for. Rachel's desperation grew stronger with every passing day. She seemed to sense that I was slipping away from her, and it showed in everything she did. She'd wake up early to make breakfast, leave little notes for me around the house, and even suggested a weekend getaway, just the two of us. It was strange, seeing her go from the confident woman who once asked to explore with someone else to someone almost desperate to regain my affection. It was almost amusing to watch her switch from being sure of herself to becoming so unsure of us. But I wasn't about to let her off the hook. I kept my responses light, casual, never giving her anything to hold on to. The more distant I acted, the more panicked she seemed to become. She was finally understanding what it felt like to be on the outside. Looking in, one evening, she brought up the idea of couples therapy. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as if she were admitting defeat. "Maybe we could talk to someone together, to work through things," she suggested, her eyes pleading. I looked her in the eye, keeping my face neutral. "Rachel, therapy won't erase what you did with Mark," I said evenly. "It's something I'm still working through on my own." The effect was immediate. She looked like she'd been slapped, her face falling as she nodded in quiet defeat. I could see that she was starting to understand the weight of what she'd thrown away, and I wasn't going to make it any easier for her. Then, I decided to push things even further. I started making plans that didn't involve her, casually mentioning dinners and outings with friends, including Sarah. "I'm meeting up with a few people after work," I'd say. "Might be late." Rachel would nod, forcing a smile, but I could see the hurt flickering in her eyes each time. One night, as I was getting ready to go out, she finally broke down. She stood by the door, her eyes filled with tears, and whispered, "Please don't go. Can we talk?" I looked at her, keeping my calm. "Rachel, I told you I need time. Sometimes I just need space." She reached for my hand, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I never should have asked. I never should have done it. I made a terrible mistake, and I'd do anything to take it back." I pulled my hand away gently, maintaining my distance. "Regret doesn't erase what's been done, Rachel. I'm not sure you understand what it's like to feel betrayed by the person you trusted most." Her face crumpled, and she nodded, defeated. She was starting to grasp that her actions had consequences she couldn't simply apologize away. I walked out the door, leaving her alone with her guilt. When I returned later that night, I found her asleep on the couch, her phone clutched in her hand as if she'd been waiting up for me. I left her there, knowing that every small act of rejection was sinking deeper and deeper into her heart. Over the following days, Rachel's efforts grew even more frantic. She tried everything to bring us closer, lingering near me, touching my arm, even offering to cook my favorite meals. But I remained distant, letting her gestures fall flat. It was like she was trying to hold onto a shadow, and each time she thought she had a grip, it slipped further away. Then, one evening, I decided to add another layer to my plan. After we finished a quiet dinner together, I took out my phone and casually sent Sarah a quick message right in front of Rachel. It wasn't anything suspicious, just a simple, "Hope you're doing well." But I knew it would be enough to push Rachel's insecurities even further. Her face fell as she watched me type the message, and I saw her bite her lip, struggling to keep her emotions in check. "Why are you texting Sarah?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shrugged, keeping my tone neutral. "She's been a good friend to me, Rachel. She listens. She understands. Things you used to do." Her face crumpled, her body trembling as she tried to hold back tears. "Please," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. "I'll do anything to make this right. I can't lose you. I was a fool. I know that now." I met her gaze, keeping my expression distant. "It's not about making it right, Rachel. It's about the fact that you were willing to risk us for something meaningless. I'm not sure I can ever forget that." That night, she cried herself to sleep, and I didn't comfort her. I stayed on my side of the bed, letting her feel the emptiness she had created. Every moment of silence, every look of detachment was a reminder of her betrayal. And the more she tried to reach out, the further I pulled back. The next morning, Rachel's desperation was almost palpable. She seemed on edge, as if she were bracing herself for something final, some ending she couldn't prevent. She looked worn down, like someone who'd been carrying a burden they couldn't set down. I could see that she was breaking under the weight of her own regret, that every little thing reminded her of the distance between us. That evening, she suggested another quiet night together. Her voice carried a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. "Just us," she whispered, her eyes pleading. I agreed, but I kept myself emotionally distant, only half engaging in conversation. Over dinner, she brought up the topic of Mark, trying to explain her actions one more time. "It was a mistake, a moment of weakness," she said softly. "I thought it would bring something new to my life, but all it did was make me realize how much I need you, how much I love you." I let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding, keeping my tone even. "Rachel, you didn't just make a mistake. You chose to betray me. You put your desires above our marriage. And now you're only realizing the cost." She blinked, her face pale as my words sank in. She tried to muster a response, but no words came. Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, her face full of shame and regret. I could see she was finally starting to understand the depth of what she'd done. Then, to drive the point home, I picked up my phone again and sent Sarah a casual message, right in front of her. It was nothing incriminating, but enough to make Rachel's heart sink. I could see the flash of hurt in her eyes, the way she clenched her fists to keep herself from saying something. "Why do you keep texting her?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. I looked at her calmly. "Because sometimes, it's nice to have someone who listens, who cares, someone who understands me." Rachel's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks as she let out a shaky breath. I thought you'd forgiven me," she whispered, her voice breaking. I let my expression soften just enough to give her a glimmer of hope, but not enough to erase her guilt. "Forgiveness is a process, Rachel. I'm trying, but it's hard when I remember what happened." She nodded, defeated, barely able to meet my gaze. She looked broken, finally realizing that she might have lost me for good. I stayed distant, letting her feel the weight of every choice she'd made, every piece of trust she'd shattered. This was only part of the lesson. She needed to understand the depth of her actions and the price she'd have to pay. After months of calculated detachment and watching Rachel unravel under the weight of her guilt, I knew it was time to bring things to an end. Her regret was real. Her desperation to keep me was clear. But for me, there was no coming back from what she'd done. I wanted her to feel the same devastation she'd inflicted on me, and I was finally ready to let her see the truth. One evening, I asked her to sit down, saying we needed to have a serious talk. She looked at me with hopeful eyes, probably clinging to the belief that I might be ready to forgive her, that I might be willing to rebuild what we once had. But she had no idea that this conversation would shatter any last remnant of hope she had left. "Rachel," I began, keeping my tone even, "I've been thinking about us, about everything you did. And after everything, I've come to a decision." She leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Just please, don't give up on us." I gave her a small, cold smile, one that let her know she'd lost the upper hand. "Rachel, you don't seem to understand. You were willing to throw everything away for a thrill, for something you thought you were missing. You didn't just betray me. You disrespected everything we built together. And now, you're begging me to stay. But why would I want to be with someone who had so little regard for me?" Her face fell, and she stammered, her voice cracking with desperation. "I was wrong. I was selfish. But please don't do this. I'll do anything." I looked at her, unfeeling, and said, "Rachel, you made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I deserve better than to be someone's second option. Better than to be the husband you run back to after you've had your fun with someone else." I reached down and pulled out a small envelope, placing it on the table in front of her. Inside were the signed divorce papers. "I want you to move out by the end of the week," I said calmly. This is over. Her eyes filled with horror and disbelief as she stared at the envelope. No, you don't mean that. We can still fix this. I love you, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. I watched her crumble, feeling no pity. Love? I scoffed. If this is your idea of love, then I don't want it. You lost me the day you decided I wasn't enough. With that, I stood up and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her tears, her regret, and the cold reality that there was no going back. She had gambled with our marriage, and she had lost everything. The next few days were a blur. Rachel spent most of her time packing her things, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She tried to talk to me a few more times, desperate to change my mind, but I remained distant. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to let her words sway me. She had already proven that she could betray me once, and I wasn't about to give her the chance to do it again. When the day came for her to leave, she stood by the door, looking back at me one last time. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never meant to hurt you like this. I looked at her, my face impassive. Intentions don't change what you did, Rachel. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. She nodded, defeated, and turned to leave. I watched her go, feeling a strange sense of relief. The weight I'd been carrying for so long finally lifted, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life, reconnecting with friends, and finding a sense of stability on my own. It wasn't easy. The memories of what Rachel had done still haunted me, and I knew it would take time to fully heal. But I had finally taken back control of my life, and I was ready to move forward. Rachel had taught me a hard lesson about trust, about the fragility of love and the price of betrayal. And while I would carry the scars of this experience with me, I knew I was stronger for it. I had come through the fire, and now I was free. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.